My name is Jessica, and I have been a paramedic for 16 years. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, a city surrounded by evergreen forests and a certain kind of quiet resilience that becomes part of your DNA when you live there. My parents were both teachers, modest, disciplined people who believed in serving others. I watched them work long hours for students who couldn't always appreciate their efforts, and somehow, I knew I wanted something similar but different, something more immediate, something where I could touch someone's life in the most critical moment possible. I started my career at 22, fresh out of emergency medical training, full of idealism and absolutely terrified. Portland's neighborhoods taught me everything about human fragility. I worked in neighborhoods where poverty and addiction painted a different picture than the one tourists saw, but I also learned that every single person, regardless of their circumstances, deserved my best effort. That was my principle then, and it remains my principle now. I have responded to over 4,000 calls in my career, 4,000 moments where someone needed help, and I was there. I moved to Seattle 15 years ago for a relationship that didn't last, but the city did. Seattle's rainy winters matched my temperament perfectly, persistent, determined, and willing to weather any storm. The emergency services here are world-class. The hospitals are excellent. The training is rigorous, but nothing in that. Training truly prepares you for what happens when you have to make an impossible choice. Nothing prepares you for the moment when the person giving orders tells you to let someone die, and something inside you refuses. I have always been the type of person who asks questions. My teachers called it defiance. My parents called it curiosity. My supervisors usually call it problematic. But on one particular night in November, that questioning nature would either destroy my career or define it completely. I didn't know which one it would be when I clocked in for my shift. I just knew it would be an ordinary night, the kind that precedes the extraordinary ones, and I was right about that. Then people imagine paramedic life as constant action and drama. The truth is far different. Most of my shifts consist of routine calls, repetitive documentation, and long periods of waiting. A fall in someone's home, a chest pain that turns out to be anxiety, a child with a fever whose parents panic. These are the calls that fill my logbook. They matter, but they are not the ones that change you. What changes you are the quiet moments between calls, the conversations in the ambulance bay with colleagues who understand what you understand. My partner for the last 7 years has been Marcus. He is 48, divorced twice, and possesses the kind of dark humor that only develops after thousands of hours of witnessing human suffering. We rarely discuss our feelings. Instead, we exchange looks that mean everything. We know when the other is exhausted, when the other is struggling, when the other needs to decompress by grabbing terrible coffee and not speaking for 20 minutes. The day before the incident I am about to describe, we had worked a particularly difficult shift. 3 overdoses. 2 of them did not make it past the hospital. The third was a young woman, probably no older than 25, who was revived but would likely face a long recovery in a psychiatric facility. These calls accumulate inside you. They sit in your chest like small stones you carry everywhere. I went home that evening and sat in my apartment for 2 hours without turning on any lights. My cat, Sadie, jumped on my lap and stayed there, sensing what I could not articulate. This is what the outside world does not understand about emergency services. You do not simply clock out and become normal again. The weight of other people's traumas becomes your weight. You carry it home. You carry it to bed. You carry it forward into the next shift. The workplace dynamics on my team are complicated. There are hierarchies that exist beyond rank. There are personalities that clash. There are people who have been doing this for 30 years, and people like me who have been doing it for 16 and somehow still feel new. Everyone respects your technical ability eventually. But respect is different from acceptance. Acceptance takes time. It takes shared moments of crisis and resolution. It takes proving yourself over and over again. Here is my question for you. How many times do you think someone has to prove themselves before others finally believe in them? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Emergency medicine operates on a hierarchy that is almost military in its structure. Paramedics are the first response. We are the ones who reach patients in their homes, on the streets, in their cars. We stabilize, we assess, we transport. Nurses receive us at the hospital with varying degrees of enthusiasm. Then there are the physicians, the final authority, the ones who make the ultimate decisions about life and death. This structure exists for good reasons. It prevents chaos. It establishes clear command and responsibility, but it also creates dynamics that can become toxic. Dr. Robert Hamilton had been working in emergency medicine for 32 years. He was the kind of doctor who commanded a room the moment he entered it, tall, gray-haired, with a voice that carried both intelligence and certainty. He had saved countless lives. He had also made difficult decisions that meant some patients did not receive the full extent of interventions available. He called this clinical judgment. He called it knowing when to fight and when to accept, but I would come to see it differently. I had transported patients to Dr. Hamilton's department many times. Our interactions were always professional and brief. He would nod at us as we transferred the patient to the hospital bed. We would provide a rapid report about vitals, symptoms, interventions performed. He would acknowledge with a gesture or a word. There was no warmth in our interactions, but there was respect, or at least I thought there was. The emergency department in Seattle operates at high capacity most nights. The waiting room is always full. The beds are always occupied. The staff moves with the choreography of people who have done this thousands of times together. Nurses know what doctors need before they ask. Technicians anticipate the next step. It is a system that works because everyone has internalized the expectations and the rhythms. Breaking those rhythms is dangerous. Breaking those rhythms is also sometimes necessary. Thank you deeply for staying with me this far. I know these stories are not always easy to hear. They require you to sit with discomfort and complexity. I see you, and I appreciate you. The best is still coming, I promise you that. But before we continue, I want to know, what do you think about these hierarchies in emergency medicine? Do you think they are necessary, or do they sometimes prevent the best care? Please share your thoughts in the comments. To understand Dr. Hamilton fully, you need to know something about what shapes emergency room physicians. They see the worst of human existence daily. They see young people destroyed by addiction. They see elderly patients with no family. They see the effects of violence, accident, and disease in their most acute forms. This work either breaks you or hardens you. Most physicians find some balance between compassion and pragmatism. Dr. Hamilton had swung too far toward pragmatism. He believed in what he called appropriate resignation. When a patient came in with catastrophic injuries, particularly if they were poor or marginalized, he would sometimes make rapid assessments that led to minimal intervention. He would frame this as mercy. Why prolong suffering? He would ask. Why use resources that could help someone with better outcomes? His words had logic, but his application lacked humanity. I learned about this reputation gradually, through conversations with nurses who had worked alongside him for years. One nurse named Patricia pulled me aside once in the hospital cafeteria. She was probably in her 50s, with the weathered appearance of someone who has witnessed too much. She said, "Be careful with Dr. Hamilton. He has already decided the outcome before he sees the patient. That is dangerous, Jessica." I did not fully understand what she meant then. The incident that changed my career forever involved a patient that fell squarely into Dr. Hamilton's category of people he believed could not be saved. A soldier, 24 years old, name of Thomas Garrett. He had been in Seattle on leave from his base in Washington state. He was drinking in a bar downtown when an altercation began. What started as words escalated into violence. Someone pulled a knife. Thomas tried to stop the fight from escalating and took multiple stab wounds to the abdomen, chest, and left shoulder. The injuries were severe, catastrophic, some would say, but I did not know any of this when the call came in. I only knew that Marcus and I had a critical incoming trauma. I only knew that we needed to move fast and think fast. I only knew that someone was bleeding, and our job was to keep them alive long enough to get them to a place where surgery could happen. That was the contract between us and the patients we served. Keep them alive, get them to the hospital, let the doctors do what doctors do. What I did not know was that Dr. Hamilton had already decided that this particular soldier was beyond saving. What I did not know was that he would tell me to stop trying. The call came in at 2:47 in the morning. Multiple stab wounds, downtown location, significant bleeding. Marcus and I were 6 minutes away from the scene. Those 6 minutes felt like 30. We moved through the Seattle streets in near silence, the kind of focused tension that develops between partners who have done this dance 1,000 times. We both knew what we would find. We both knew it would be bad. The scene was chaos in a way that only downtown knife fights can create. Police were already there, securing the area and keeping bystanders back. The victim, Thomas, was on the ground in front of a closed restaurant. He was conscious, which was surprising given the amount of blood. His breathing was rapid and shallow. His skin was gray. His eyes held that particular kind of panic that comes from knowing something is fundamentally wrong with your body, but not understanding exactly what. I knelt beside him immediately, my hands already moving through the assessment we have performed thousands of times. Airway, breathing, circulation. The wounds were where the dispatcher said they would be. The abdominal wounds were the most concerning. I could see that something inside him was very wrong, but he was alive. He was conscious. He was attempting to speak. "Help me," he said. "Please help me." Marcus was already establishing an IV line. I was already preparing for rapid transport. This was what we trained for. This was what we did. The decision tree was clear. Stabilize, treat for shock, transport immediately to the trauma center, and let the surgeons take it from there. We had maybe 4 minutes of loading time before we needed wheels rolling. Every second mattered. We moved Thomas to the ambulance with practiced efficiency. The protocols are designed to minimize time on scene and maximize time en route to definitive care. I stayed in the back with Thomas while Marcus drove. I was talking to him constantly, telling him we were taking him to get help, asking him questions to keep him conscious and alert. This is another part of the job that people do not understand. You are not just a medical technician. You are also a presence. You are the thing that keeps them anchored to this world when they are slipping away. The drive to the hospital took 9 minutes. During those 9 minutes, I performed 2 rounds of chest compressions when his heart rate began to deteriorate. I adjusted his oxygen. I monitored his bleeding, and I talked to him about his life. He told me about his mother in California. He told me he had been in the military for 3 years. He told me he was afraid. I told him we were almost there. I told him he was going to be okay. I told him he needed to fight. Whether I believed it or not was irrelevant. He needed to hear it. We arrived at the emergency department at 3:14 in the morning. The trauma bay was ready. The surgical team had been notified. Everything was prepared for Thomas's arrival and the procedures that would follow. I gave my handoff report to the trauma nurse. 24-year-old male, multiple stab wounds to abdomen, chest, and left shoulder. 2 episodes of cardiac arrest in the field, both successfully resuscitated. Current status: conscious, responsive, vitals unstable, ongoing bleeding from abdominal wounds. The facts were stated. The medical information was clear. Now it was the hospital's responsibility. Except Dr. Hamilton had other plans. He walked into the trauma bay as we were transferring Thomas to the hospital bed. He did not introduce himself to the patient. He did not ask any questions. He looked at Thomas, looked at the chart, and his face made a decision before his mouth did. I watched this happen. I have witnessed it with my own eyes, and I know what I saw. He began giving orders to the trauma team. No aggressive intervention, minimal fluids, make the patient comfortable. His words were calm. His tone was final. This was a man, accustomed to being obeyed. The nurses looked at each other briefly but began to comply. This is the power of authority. This is how quickly institutional hierarchy can override individual instinct. I should have left. I should have walked out of the trauma bay and let the system function as designed. My job was complete. The patient was in medical hands, but something in me refused to accept what was happening. I had just spent 9 minutes fighting to keep this young man alive. I had just spent 9 minutes telling him to fight, and now I was being asked to let him die without attempting everything possible. I stepped forward. I said, "Doctor, are we not going to proceed with surgery?" My voice was quiet, but my question was loud. The trauma bay became very still. Dr. Hamilton turned to look at me with an expression that combined surprise and annoyance. He said, "Paramedic, the patient has unsurvivable injuries. Surgery will only prolong suffering. This is the appropriate clinical decision." His words were phrased as fact, but they felt like opinion. I said, "With respect, doctor, he was conscious and responsive during transport. His vitals are deteriorating but not unsurvivable. There is still time for intervention." My heart was racing. I was violating protocols. I was questioning a physician's judgment in front of his entire team. I was doing exactly what you are never supposed to do in a hospital hierarchy, but I was also witnessing what I believed was a fundamental breach of medical ethics. Dr. Hamilton's face changed. He took a step toward me and said in a voice that was quiet but carried absolute authority, "Paramedic, you do not make medical decisions here. You do not tell me what to do with my patients. You are out of line. Leave this trauma bay immediately." These were not suggestions. These were orders from someone accustomed to being obeyed. I did not leave. What I did instead was turn directly to the trauma nurse and say, "What is his blood type?" She looked at Dr. Hamilton, uncertain about whether to answer me. I looked back at her and repeated, "What is his blood type?" My voice was different now. It was no longer asking permission. It was asking for information that I had a right to possess. The nurse, whose name tag read Sarah, said quietly, "Oh, positive." I nodded. Then I looked at the surgical resident who was standing in the corner of the trauma bay, a young woman probably in her 2nd year of training. I said, "You know this patient is salvageable, don't you?" She did not answer directly, but her eyes told me everything. She knew. They all knew. The only person in that room who seemed certain of a death sentence was Dr. Hamilton. I walked over to the monitor displaying Thomas's vital signs. His heart rate was elevated but regular. His blood pressure was low but responding to fluids. His oxygen saturation was adequate. These were not the vital signs of an unsurvivable patient. These were the vital signs of someone in shock who needed immediate surgery. This was someone who, with appropriate intervention, had a fighting fighting chance. Dr. Hamilton was now directly confronting me. He said, "Paramedic, I have given you a direct order to leave this trauma bay. If you do not comply, I will have you removed, and I will file a report against your license." His words were threat and promise combined. He had the power to destroy my career. He had the power to end my ability to practice medicine in any form, and he was absolutely serious. I stood there, in that moment, knowing that everything hinged on what I did next. I could walk away. I could preserve my career, my reputation, my future, or I could do what I believed was right and face the consequences. I thought about Thomas. I thought about his mother in California, who did not yet know that her son had been stabbed. I thought about the fact that he had fought to stay alive in my ambulance, and I had told him to keep fighting. I could not abandon him now. I looked directly at Dr. Hamilton and said, "I am not leaving. This patient is salvageable, and you know it. I will not participate in abandoning him, and I will file a report documenting this entire encounter." The words came out steady, even though my hands were shaking. The room became absolutely silent. "Here is what I want to know from you, watching this. Where are you watching from right now? What country? What city? Are you in a hospital? Are you at home? Are you a medical professional yourself? Or are you someone who has witnessed something similar in your own life? Please write your location and your thoughts in the comments below. I want to know who is hearing this story with me." Dr. Hamilton's face turned a shade of red I had not seen before. He was about to respond, about to escalate the confrontation, when the surgical resident spoke. She said, "Doctor, I think we should take this patient to surgery. I believe we can intervene effectively." Her voice was young and uncertain, but it was enough. Other nurses nodded. The consensus in the room shifted, not away from Dr. Hamilton's authority, but toward the possibility that he might be wrong. Now, what happened next is a blur of action and intensity. The surgical team mobilized. Thomas was prepped for the operating room with speed and precision. I was asked to leave the trauma bay at that point, my presence no longer relevant once the hospital had taken full charge. I stood in the hallway outside the operating room, still in my paramedic gear, covered in Thomas's blood, watching through the small window as they wheeled him into surgery. Marcus found me there. He did not ask what had happened because he could read it on my face. He simply stood beside me in silent support. That is what partnership means in this job. It means standing with someone through the consequences of their choices. We waited for nearly 4 hours. The surgery was complex. Thomas had multiple injuries that required intervention. One of his wounds was dangerously close to his heart. Another had caused internal bleeding into his abdomen. The surgical team worked with the kind of focused intensity that characterizes trauma surgery. They were fighting for his life in a way that Dr. Hamilton had insisted was futile. At 6:58 in the morning, the surgeon came out of the operating room. His name was Dr. Chen. He was a man in his 50s with the calm authority that comes from truly knowing your craft. He said, "The patient is stable. We successfully repaired his injuries. His condition is critical but stable. He is going to the ICU. He has a very good chance of survival and a very good chance of returning to full function." He paused, looking directly at me. Whoever made the call to bring him to surgery made the right decision. This young man was absolutely salvageable. I did not need to say anything. Dr. Chen could see the relief and vindication in my expression. Thomas was alive. Thomas was going to survive. The decision to fight, the decision to refuse to accept a predetermined death sentence, had been the correct one. But the victory of saving his life was complicated by what would come next. I had violated protocol. I had questioned a physician's judgment in front of his team. I had essentially insubordinated myself in a system built on hierarchy and compliance. There would be consequences. There would be investigations. There would be reports filed and meetings scheduled. The fact that I had been right did not make any of those things disappear. And the formal investigation began 3 days later. The hospital's administration became involved. The fire department that employed me became involved. Dr. Hamilton filed a complaint that described my actions as inappropriate interference in medical decision-making and insubordination. He did not mention his initial decision to withhold treatment. He did not acknowledge that the surgical team had ultimately agreed with my assessment. He framed the narrative in a way that made my actions seem reckless and self-serving rather than patient-centered and ethical. I was suspended pending investigation. My paramedic certification was temporarily suspended. I was told that I could face termination of employment. The medical community in Seattle is smaller than you might think. Word spread quickly about what had happened. Some of my colleagues were supportive. Others maintained careful distance, unwilling to associate themselves with someone who had challenged the system so directly. The investigation process was thorough and painful. I was interviewed multiple times. The trauma nurses were interviewed. The surgical resident was interviewed. Marcus was interviewed. Through all of these conversations, a clear picture emerged. Dr. Hamilton had made a decision based on factors other than medical viability. He had decided, before examining the patient, patient that this person was not worth saving, and I had challenged that decision successfully. But here is where ethics becomes complicated. The hospital could not take action against Dr. Hamilton based on this incident alone. They could not prove that his decision was motivated by anything other than clinical judgment. They could not establish a pattern of behavior without additional evidence. The system protected him in ways that it did not protect me. Thomas, meanwhile, was recovering. I visited him in the ICU on the 5th day after his surgery. He was weak, but conscious and aware. He told me that the nurses had told him what I had done. He told me that his mother was flying in from California. He told me that he would have died if I had not refused to accept Dr. Hamilton's verdict. And then he did something I was not expecting. He started to cry, not from pain or fear, but from gratitude that someone had valued his life enough to fight for it. The investigation ultimately concluded that my actions, while technically inappropriate, were motivated by patient safety concerns. I was reinstated. My suspension was lifted. I was not terminated. But the incident remained in my file. It remained a mark against me in the hospital system. Dr. Hamilton faced no disciplinary action. I am still a paramedic. I have continued working for the Seattle Fire Department for 5 more years since that incident. Thomas recovered fully and was medically discharged from the military after a rehabilitation period. We maintain contact. He visits Seattle occasionally, and we have coffee. He is working now in his hometown, building a life, being present for his mother. He is alive because I refuse to accept a predetermined death sentence. But I have also learned something through this experience that has changed how I think about my work. The system is not designed for people like me to challenge people like Dr. Hamilton. The hierarchy exists for reasons that make sense in many contexts, but the hierarchy can also become a shield for poor judgment, for cruelty, masquerading as pragmatism, for decisions that are made based on assumptions about whose life is worth saving. I have had many conversations with younger paramedics and nurses since then. I tell them that there will be moments when they see something that seems wrong. There will be moments when they will have to decide whether to comply with the system or to challenge it. I cannot tell them which choice to make. That is something each person must decide for themselves. But I can tell them that I made my choice, and I have to live with both the consequences and the knowledge that Thomas is alive. I think about what would have happened if I had simply complied. If I had walked out of that trauma bay when Dr. Hamilton ordered me to leave, a 24-year-old would be dead. A mother would be grieving. A life that could have been lived would have been erased. And I would have to carry that knowledge forever, knowing that I had chosen comfort over conscience. Emergency medicine requires us to make impossible choices every single day. We make choices about who to try to save, about how much time to spend on one patient versus another, about when to escalate and when to accept. These choices are never easy. They are made under pressure and with incomplete information. But I believe that the default should always be to fight. The default should always be to try. The default should be to see the person in front of you as someone whose life has value, regardless of their circumstances, regardless of their social status, regardless of anyone's preconceived notion about whether they are salvageable. I do not consider myself a hero. I was simply a paramedic who saw something that needed to be challenged, and I chose to challenge it. What I did that night is not extraordinary. What should be extraordinary is Dr. Hamilton's willingness to give up without trying. What should be extraordinary is any system that allows compassion to be trumped by assumption. Thank you for taking this journey with me. Thank you for listening to my story, and Thomas's story, and the story of a moment that revealed something important about who I am and what I value. If this story resonated with you, if you work in healthcare, if you have witnessed similar moments of ethical complexity, please subscribe to this channel. More stories are coming. More voices from the world of emergency medicine will be shared. The next video you absolutely must watch is about a nurse who discovered her own terminal diagnosis while caring for others. Thank you, and I hope to see you there.